Hi, welcome to Infinite Resilient Stories, where we are redefining what it means to be human, one story at a time. My name is Luis Feliz, and I'm your host, and also the guy behind the camera asking all these questions. In this interview, you will have the opportunity to hear the unique life experience of Louise Gomes. We believe her life is a miracle, just like yours. And as we listen to these stories, our ability to love and honor each other will eventually evolve, and perhaps making the world a better place. So if you like this interview, please give it a thumbs up. If you like the channel, please subscribe. And if you find yourself connecting with this interview, please leave a comment down below. We would love to hear your thoughts. So without further ado, enjoy the interview. Peace out. So what is your full name?
My full name is Louise Gomes, which is quite interesting because it's a French name, Louise, but when you say it, and Spanish people say it, it's like Louise. It sounds like Luis, like you, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a little confusing, but it's Louise Gomes.
Awesome. And place of birth?
Born in New York City, Queens, New York.
Okay. And when?
April 2nd, 1967. Spring baby. So it's like when springtime comes, it's like I'm born again. I feel like something inside me, so I love it. I love the spring.
What are the stories of your birth that you've heard?
The stories of my birth that I heard were, I was the youngest of three, so I wasn't planned, but I never felt unloved. I felt like a welcomed gift to the world. I just remember hearing stories, let's say, of my mom saying to my dad, "It's time," and my dad's like washing the car, and just funny stories. And just remember looking at pictures and coming home, and I know my grandparents were there on my mother's side, and just remember feeling very loved. So, yeah.
What is your dad's name?
My dad's name is Juan Francisco Gomez.
And where was he born?
So, both my parents are born in Spain, and is a small town called Asturias. That's in the northern part of Spain, the mountains, in a small little town. This town is called Berodia. Beautiful town.
And what was his occupation, or is his occupation?
No, he passed away. And so, I lost both my parents in 94, 96. And he was blue-collar worker, worked in a hotel, and he just was maintenance and stuff like that.
What are your memories of your dad's work?
My memories of my dad's work were, interestingly enough, I just remember him feeling and getting the sense, and he didn't complain about it, but I did get the sense that he wasn't fulfilling his dream, his goal, his desire. And because of that, his outlet of frustration was his go-to was gambling. So I remember living this life of ups and downs and intuitively knowing as a child, my dad's not happy. My dad is doing his, out of duty and obligation, he's working to create and to provide. But knowing, I would hear the arguments of my parents because of the gambling. And I know now as an adult, his gambling was because of his frustration, and that was his outlet. So it was this high, low. So, and I intuitively always knew he loved me. I never felt that I wasn't loved. It's just knowing what I know now, he wasn't happy. That was his outlet. So I've experienced a lot of ups and downs and frustration, and just feeling that wasn't he wasn't living his passion. He wasn't fulfilling his dream, and he was such a giving, loving person.
If you had to guess, what do you think was his passion?
I would say I know his passion was helping people. Anytime there was a situation or a crisis, I remember in the 90s, there was this huge mudslide in Puerto Rico. You would remember. I don't remember what year it was. And my dad worked in this hotel, and there were a lot of Puerto Rican people there. And he, was not Puerto Rican, but loved Puerto Rico because his parents and his family lived on the island. And he lived there for many years, but relocated to New York. So he raised money for this mudslide, and he raised thousands of dollars. So his passion was to help people and to lift people. And his passion was always, how can he help people? And that was just his intuitive nature of loving and helping people. So he never found a way to really monetize that for himself. He seemed to be able to do it and raise money for others, but he never for himself, yeah.
So what about your mother? What's your mother's name?
My mother's name, Margarita Cesplugues, and that name you probably never heard of. Cesplugues is a name from Barcelona. It's Catalan, which is a part of Spain in Barcelona. She spoke Catalan, she spoke Spanish. My mom was an amazing artist. My mom passed away in 1994, and her talent was such pure, naturally gifted. She was an artist since she was a child. Her parents were artists, and she came to this country. She was just gifted, and she pursued that. She actually won a scholarship to FIT, which is the Fashion Institute of Technology. And she created her own designs and fashions, and she illustrated them, and that was in 1954, 55. And back then it was more traditional for women to not work. So my mom was torn because she got married in 57, and she had this passion for illustrating, for drawing, for designing, but yet she wanted a family. And back then they didn't know you could have it all. They weren't aware of that, or the culture didn't allow them to know that. So she raised us, my brother, my sister, myself, I'm the youngest. And so she raised us in a way that she continued to do her art. She would draw, and she would make us clothes. And I remember being so frustrated, hurry up, make these clothes, And now if I can give 1 second to have that in my life, because I lost my mom in 1994. She passed away tragically. Literally, she was at my house and we were cooking, and it was literally, I went to the store, I came back, and she had an aneurysm. And so I thought she was dying. We brought her to the hospital. I called my dad, and we brought her to the hospital, and they said, no, she's not even gonna make it the night, through the night. She won't even make it and survive. And I was 27, and I'm like, how is this possible? My mom's 60 years old. What the hell's going on? And so we took her to the hospital, and we realized that's it. She had an aneurysm. She was brain dead, basically. So they declared her as brain dead. And so she was holding on for dear life, and my sister was there, my dad was there. My brother at the time lived in California, so my brother flew in, and it was like she was waiting. And it was, so amazing, because they tell you that when someone's brain dead and in a coma, they don't respond. But I had this energy with my mom and talking to her, and she couldn't communicate, but she would barely move her eyes, and I would tell her, I love you, and you've been the best mom. And I know that you probably didn't fulfill all of your dreams, but as a parent, you were the most amazing mother that could ever cultivate us and allow us to grow and nurture us, because she loved, she was a gardener, she would cultivate the earth, and she took that same beauty and did that with us to the best of her ability, with my brother and my sister and myself. And part of her stress was, dealing with these tragedies of my dad being this gambling and these challenges that they had and not having an outlet. And then my sister had a severe depression. She was diagnosed with manic depression back in the 80s. They didn't know what it was. Why is she in bed for 2 weeks at a time? Nobody knew what it was. So it was very different back then. Now it was still stigmatized as it is today, but it was more of, as a parent, she didn't know how to deal with it. How can she help her? And she kind of felt helpless. And we were dealing with, my sister's depression. Found out later on that, my sister was raped and she didn't know how to deal with it. She didn't know how. So it was just this whole idea of how do we help her. And so my mom lived with a lot of guilt. She lived with a lot of pain. And me as an empath would feel that. And I would try to help. And I was always the youngest one, trying to fix everybody. That was my go-to. How can I make you feel better? At the detriment of pleasing, I would please others at the detriment of myself, of caring about how I feel. So I grew up in that way of constantly trying to fix, the parents are having a fight. How do I fix them? My sister's having this issue. My brother's going through this. And I was just always the fixer, the trying to fix everybody. And feeling that I can allow them to feel better, doing whatever I can. And so that really was my go-to, And so in 1994, my mom passed away, 10 days after. And my dad was just a mess. He didn't know how to deal with that. And so I would call my dad, come over, and he wasn't eating, and I would try to get him to reinvigorate his life. And I helped him to sell his house and to get a new place, and I tried to help him get a new lease on life. And I guess he was 65 at the time, and he just felt his whole world just crumbled. And he did not know how to redesign and pick himself up. And he literally got physically sick. And I would see him deteriorating, and I didn't know how to help him. And it turned out that he got so physically sick, he got an ulcer. And then it was a bleeding ulcer. And by the time, it was 13 months after my mom passed away, 13 months later in January of 96, the hospital calls me up, pick up your dad, he has to come home. And I literally was like, oh my God, what the hell? Like, my world is falling apart. Like, first I lose my mom, now my dad. I'm like, I'm only 27, I'm 28. What the hell's going on? Like, I still felt like they should be around, and here I am trying to nurse my dad back to being healthy. And then I realized, oh no, he's not even gonna make it. And there was a blizzard. It was the blizzard of 96. A lot of people might remember this. There was literally 10 feet of snow. I'm like, how the hell am I gonna get my dad to the hospital? Calling an ambulance, calling my ex-husband at the time. What are we gonna do? We gotta get him. He's like, no, we gotta call an ambulance. By the time the ambulance came, they took him to the hospital. My dad was it was bad. He couldn't even speak. So they did surgery on him. And we thought he was gonna get better. Things seemed like he was looking like he was gonna get better, and he was able to write. He couldn't speak. He was able to write a couple of things. And then next thing he realized where he was and what happened. And it was like he shut down. He didn't want to live. And I just remember experiencing what it's like without the will to live. And I realized, my God, he doesn't have it. He doesn't have the will to live, not even for me, my brother, or my sister. And there was nothing I could do to invoke that spirit of life back in him. And he just slowly started shutting down his organs. And it was like 2 weeks in the hospital, of going to the hospital every day, like, oh my God, what's the change? What's the prognosis? Is he getting better? Praying he's gonna get better, calling my family, from my cousins and my aunt, everybody from Puerto Rico, and they were coming over, trying to, just in shock, like, how did this happen? And so then the doctors were saying, no, like his organs, his liver, his lungs, his everything was just shutting down. And I said, my God, he's lost his will to live. And that was painful. And here I'm living in this raw pain of feeling sorry for myself. I was like the victim. Like, how could they do this to me? And how do they leave me? I'm only 28 years old. I didn't even have kids yet. They won't even see their grandkids. And it was just raw pain of trying to figure out, how do I how do I pick up the pieces? What do I do with my life? How do I deal with this? You know? And slipping into like a depression and knowing that, I can't let myself go there. I can't do it. And so I would have these subconscious, I guess, a will from God, you know, pulling me to, you can't let this define you. You know, you gotta just go and you gotta just keep going. And at the time I didn't know what it was, but it was something inside me that was wanting to heal myself, you know, and it was that same energy that beats my heart, that beats your heart. And I didn't really know what it was, but I just kept saying, I know God is watching out for me, and I know that He's got a plan for me. And so it kind of got worse from there. I don't know if you want to ask me more questions or if I should keep talking. It actually, the more faith I had and the more I would continue to fight, because it was like, no, I got to fight for my sanity. I got to fight for my life and for my normalcy. And so I was married at the time, my ex-husband, and we decided it was time to start a family. And, you know, I had Ricky. He was my ex-husband's son, and he is my biggest blessing. I raised him since he's a baby, but we decided we were going to have our own family. And so I guess it was in 1997. I got pregnant. We were so happy. I was like, oh my God, I'm finally like life inside me growing. It was like such an amazing feeling of being able to have that, because I felt like, God, I'm surrounded by these death experiences. It was just horrible. And so I felt this new lease on life, and I'm excited, and I had a wonderful pregnancy, and everything was on target, and my first trimester, and I had that book, you know, What to Expect When You're Expecting, and oh yeah, and everything's on track, and everything was great. And I had my monthly visits, and then my weekly visits, and everything's going wonderful, and I had this beautiful experience, and then 9 months on my due date, I start getting my contractions. I'm like, wow, everything's going on target. My due date, my contractions, call my doctor, come in, we'll take you to the hospital. And we get to the doctor. I get to the doctor to my visit, and he's kind of, I've never seen that look on his face. He puts the machine on me, and he's like, blank face. I'm like, what? And he said, I can't hear a heartbeat. I barely hear it. Get to the hospital. And the hospital was right by his office, so I drove to the hospital. And I called. I don't think there was cell phones at that, or at least I don't think I had a cell phone at the time. I called my husband at the time and said, you got to get to the hospital. And then I just remember it was like a dream that I just didn't want to be in. And they told me, we don't hear a heartbeat. And I said, no, this can't be happening. This cannot be happening. How am I manifesting death all the time? How is this happening? I said, no, how is this happening? And so, what's the plan? What are we gonna do? Are you sure? So they shuffle me to this room on the maternity ward, and I'm in this back room, and I'm like, what are we gonna do? Are we gonna check again? And they checked, and another doctor checked, and they said, we're sorry, your baby's dead. Your baby died. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? And so I'm like, I just felt my baby this morning. You know, how is this happening? And so They couldn't give me an explanation. And the plan was to give birth. And I said, what? How am I going to give birth? I have a stillborn baby inside me. And they said, that's what we do. I said, aren't you taking this baby out? How am I going to give birth? You want me to do all the work? And so they drugged me on the most weirdest drugs I've ever been on. And I felt like I was in a nightmare. And I was pushing, and they were provoking the contractions. And I'm screaming, and I just remember it was like this bad dream. It was just horrible. And I just remember coming in and out of consciousness and thinking, is this real? Am I in a nightmare? Like, what the fuck is going on? And I just remember how painful it was, and how not only physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, I felt like, oh my God, like I cannot even give life. I can't even provide that. And so the baby was born, and my ex-husband at the time sat down on a chair next to me, and he held the baby. I couldn't even hold the baby. It was just so painful to me. Beautiful baby girl, and she looked just like him and his family. Dark hair. He's Puerto Rican, so dominant genes, so nice tan and black hair and dark eyes. And I just was beside myself with the pain. And I just was angry and hurt. And I just remember feeling like a failure, like, what did I do? And the guilt and the shame and the failure was just so consuming. And so I was in the recovery room, and I remember they had this picture on the window. I guess it was of a dead tree. That's their symbol of stillborn. And I said, my God, this is what I represent, a dead fucking tree. How pathetic is that? And how hurtful it was to me. And so I remember the social worker coming in the room, and she said, oh my God, honey, I'm sorry. I know how you feel. I said, oh my God, you do? You had a stillborn? No, I haven't had a stillborn. But I said, get the fuck out of my room. If you haven't experienced this, you need to not talk to me and send me somebody who has. And she left, humbly left, and I was just angry and hurt. And then they came in the room with a box. And here I am leaving the hospital a day later with a box. I was like a fucking zombie with a blanket and a picture of my dead baby. Left the hospital. Nobody told me anything. I had no clue. I mean, talk about postpartum fucking depression. It was bad, Louie. It was bad. I had the pain of carrying this life inside me and then giving birth to a stillborn. Everybody's leaving the hospital with their beautiful baby, and I'm leaving with a box. I was just like a zombie. And I was just like, how the fuck is this happening? My ex-husband at the time, he was just beside himself. We were just in shock. And his grieving and my grieving became very different. And so I realized he just doesn't get it. I'm emotional, I'm hormonal. I carried the baby. His attachment was so different. We ended up going to like a group counseling therapy for couples who lost babies, which helped. But his grieving was very different than mine. And I was just in excruciating pain. And I remember friends coming over and people talking to me. And I did have a friend who went through a stillborn pregnancy as well. And I got help from talking. I always knew talking was my way. And people, doctors were offering me pills and drugs and do this and do that. No, I knew I had to go through this without being masked, because if not, I would never feel that pain. I would never heal. I didn't want to mask. Something inside me knew that. Now, like at the time, I didn't know that. Now looking back, I know why I didn't take the pills, but I just didn't want the pills. I didn't want the pills because I said, no, I got to get through this myself, you know? And I didn't know. Nobody told me. Nobody informed me I was going to walk into a supermarket. I was going to hear a baby cry, and here I am lactating. I hear a baby cry, and I'm lactating. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Like, my body was responding, and I felt like such a failure. And a lot of moms who go through stillborn, you know, these are a lot of conversations that people don't have. I felt like a failure. I felt guilty. I felt wrong. I felt shameful. I felt like, what did I do? What did I do wrong? Did I eat too much sugar? Did I not eat enough of, God, you know, all these crazy things, you know, going through my head. And, you know, they did an autopsy and it was inconclusive. Nothing ever came out why. The best explanation they gave me was that she could have been like the cord was twisted. And she was asphyxiated, because they said when I gave birth, the cord was really wrapped tight around her neck and everything. And so it was an inconclusive. But the shame and the guilt and the pain was just so intense that I didn't want to get out of bed. And it just was like in my world of pain and suffering and victim, and like reliving my mom and then my dad and now my baby, and I was victim. I was just like, why me? And how, you know. But something inside me must have been subconscious, because I knew I couldn't live that way. Like,
1 minute?
yeah.
And we have to take a break.
Yeah. So I just remember knowing that I couldn't, you know, I had to move on. And so I even remember writing like a to-do list: get out of bed, take a shower. Like, if I could accomplish those two things, then that was my to-do list. I felt satisfied with that, you know, and that's how it all began, basically. So yeah, I just remember something inside me, that powerful force, and it wasn't even a conscious force, but something inside me was like every day, like taking me towards a place of doing something to be healed. And boy, did I call on God. I mean, it was like, God, this is now between you and me. I need your strength. Like, tell me what to do. What do I need to do? And I just remember him telling me baby steps. Because I'm like that first person where I want to get shit done immediately, you know. I'm like Aries, first person, like first sign of the zodiac, fire sign, got to go everything quick. So I'm like, now, instant gratification, you know. And it was like, nope, baby steps. You got to pace yourself. And I was just like, wow, okay, today, shower, eat. If I could do those two things, I knew I was on the road. And I might have been in bed a couple of days before I was able to do those things, but I just remember, okay, doing it, doing that, okay. And every day, then before you know it, it was like walking. And for me, exercise became my connection to nature, which became my connection to the universe, to God. And it was like there began my healing journey of me realizing how connected I am with nature. God wanted me outside so I can begin my healing process. So I just remember that was my go-to. Healing out in nature, walking, talking to God. Like, do you go to church? No, my church is in my car. My church is in the park. My church is in me. And I developed that relationship with God because that was the only thing that could get me to the next level. Because when you're all the way at the bottom, well, at least for me, being all the way at the bottom, it was like, okay, I surrender, God. What do I need to do? And that little voice inside me would tell me these little baby steps. Do this, do that, do this. You know, get help, get therapy. And we got help and counseling and I knew I was meant to be a mom. I said, no, I'm doing this again. It's very scary. I said, I'm determined to do this again. So I think it was about 8 or 9 months later of this journey of healing, of going through this process. And so 8 months later, I found out I was pregnant to my oldest son, Lorenzo. Now he's 20. So pregnant with Lorenzo, in this super vigilant pregnancy of, I bought this monitor and I'm monitoring myself, and I'm like, I became my own, it was kind of nerve-wracking actually, but I was like I bought this heartbeat monitor, and I was like journaling and writing. It was just a little pathetic, to be honest with you. I couldn't enjoy any pregnancy, but it made me feel like I was in control, which I know I'm not, but it made me feel that way. And I was like, oh, I'm in control. I know this, I know that. I've learned this, I learned that. And looking back, I'm like, yeah, okay, sure, you were in control. Okay. He's in control. The universe, that, like I said, that same energy that's beating your heart, my heart, making our cells grow, that's God. He's in control. Anyway, so I give birth to Lorenzo, and he's like, like the Lion King. He's like the golden child. It was like, this child was so loved. I just remember everybody coming over and just celebrating life. And I'm like, finally, get to celebrate life. So his name is Lorenzo Vidal Sostre. So Vidal is the Latin word for life. I wanted his first name to be Vidal, but they're like, that's a last name. I'm like, I don't care, I love that name. But anyway, so Lorenzo Vidal, which means life. And so for me, that's life. He symbolized life. He symbolized the purity of what a beautiful life should manifest into. And so we have such an amazing relationship. And he has a great relationship with his older brother, Ricky, my stepson. And then came Gabriel 2 years later, Gabriel Francisco Sostre. So Gabriel, 2 years younger, he was my surprise, my wow. Life happens, and I didn't even, it wasn't even planned. I'm like, okay, now I'm in the flow. This is good. I'm like, okay, finally, good things are happening, so I'm feeling that really good thing happening. And then at the same time, I kind of go back to the story with my sister, because I touched on the fact that my sister had a lot of challenges. She suffered from this depression, I guess manic depression. It was horrific. She couldn't control it if she tried. And so I'm I have my kids and I'm living this happy life. And then at the same time, I'm having this relationship with my sister. I'm the younger one, but in a way, I'm kind of like her caretaker, because she just needed so much help and assistance. And so I had that hole in my heart from her and trying to help her. And it was painful having to deal with a sister like that who couldn't even take care of herself. And me being the one, my parents, they appointed me to be in charge of her money. And it was like, oh God, I got to deal with this now. So it was like, here I am in control of her life, her money, her apartment. I had to control it all. And it was not a happy thing to do when you have somebody that you have to take care of because she can't do it on her own. So she is on all these meds and in and out of the hospital and in and out. And it was just like, oh my God, what the hell's going on? And I don't know if you've ever seen these medication commercials, but a lot of times you listen and one of the side effects is death. And it's like, wow, okay, this is real. And so I remember it was December of 2011. We spoke every day. And she had just gotten out of the hospital and she was happy. And they put me on new meds and I think I'm feeling better. I might have fallen down. I'm like, well, what do you mean you fell down? Oh, I think I had a seizure. I'm like, well, you need to get your ass into the hospital tomorrow and figure out what's going on. And then so the last words she said to me was, I love you, baby. And then the next day, her boyfriend, they were living together at the time, calls me up and says, she won't wake up. She's dead. I'm like, what are you talking about? I just fucking spoke to her last night. She just said, I love you. We just spoke. He's like, no, she's gone. I'm like, oh no, here I go again. So I'm like, okay. Again with my controller, figuring like, okay, I think I know how to control these emotions. I think I know how to, like, controller coming in of trying to control these emotions. And so at the time, my kids were like, and Ricky was 18 and Lorenzo was 10 and Gabriel was 8, and I was going through a divorce. That's a whole nother story. They'll deal with the loss of a marriage, I'll tell you that. But so I'm dealing with this divorce, and here I am, my sister's in New York, and I have to go and get her, she to be cremated. And so I just remember going into the funeral parlor and again saying, why me? Like, what the fuck? I'm the youngest. Like, I feel like I'm taking care of everybody. Like, I had to deal with this with my mom and my dad, and that pity party kept running me. Like, here I had to deal with this and all these stories, I had to deal with my mother and then my father and then my baby and then now my sister. Like, I was just angry. And my brother lives in Japan. I was like, you know what? You need to get your ass over here. I'm tired of being the one like doing everything, And so I just remember going in the funeral parlor and she just looked so peaceful. And I just remember feeling her peace, like, fuck, she's finally at peace. And I really, really realized at this time of my life, this juncture, I realized we are eternal. We are eternal. There's no way that this is it. And so just having the peace of knowing that she's with my mom, she's with my dad, she's with my baby, and they communicate with me. I mean, I literally have this energy where I feel my parents. And maybe be it such a profound love, but I literally can walk in my home and I could feel my parents like talking to me and telling me through an audio, like saying, you're loved, you're cared for, we're watching over you. And my lights in my house flicker, people come in my house, and people who are sensitive, my sister-in-law Yolanda would feel it. She had lived with me for a few months when she moved to Florida. She said, oh my God, I feel your family in this house, like such a presence. So people who are sensitive would feel that. So, and I've even had people come up to me that I've never met. A lady came up to me in a bookstore and she said, you don't know me, but I have a message for you. I'm like, okay, what? She's like, your dad wants to tell you he loves you. And I'm like, wow, okay, this is real. This whole physical reality that we're living in is like a dream because we're eternal beings. And that's when my real journey into knowing, like, we are spiritual beings. And I feel like my parents and my sister are like with my baby, and they have this whole other spiritual, eternal, beautiful place that they're at. And that gives me peace to know that this whole thing that we're doing is an evolution. I feel like all of these experiences are, for me, have been an evolution and a cultivation, because I never would have had this compassion and love that I have for my kids and really being present in the moment. I feel like losing my first child was a wake-up call. Like, you get to be present. You get to appreciate that life that you have in your house. So anytime like they're young and they're 2 and they're, with the toys and fighting, I would collect myself and be present and say, no. This is life. Enjoy it. So through that pain, I noticed the molding of the clay and the cultivation of the compassion and the love. And that pain has caused me to be able to be much more compassionate to others. That I probably would have never been that way. I probably would have been just in my own little world and only consumed by myself. But now, seeing my friends' parents getting older, I have a love and a compassion that I can extend to them and let them know that we are eternal beings. It's not like we're here now and we're gone. We will live and we will continue to live. So I feel like I've had so many lessons that have taught me so many things that I'm now teaching my kids and planting those seeds and letting them know and for them to be aware that we're not in control. Something higher than us is in control. And we get to surrender and we get to live that life knowing that there's a higher being and we get to gravitate towards that. And this whole thing that we go through called life is an evolution. It's an evolution of our consciousness to become greater to God. And so I want to live my life letting my kids know that this is just an evolution to get to your higher self, and your higher self is connected to God. We're part of God. It's like a drop in the ocean, right? The ocean is a vast ocean of water, but we're just a drop in the ocean. It's still ocean water. It's still part of the ocean. That's how I see us. We're like a drop, right? God and the spirit world is all part of that. And so we are part of God. We are part of that source. We are part of that love. And so I really get to share that message with people. And so death doesn't end there. I kept going. You want to hear more? I mean, I had some even crazier experiences with it that have really, I thought it was going to stop, but it kept going. So I had the death of a marriage, which, at the time I was all caught up in what I thought marriage should look like and what it should be, and trying to, have that other person be what I wanted them to be, realizing I can't change anybody. I can't control anybody. And so finally it was a letting go of the marriage and letting him be who just be you. You do you, I'll do me. We have kids. He loves his kids. He's a much better dad than he was a husband. So, he took care of those kids in that sense. And so that marriage just dissolved, and then going through the mourning of now a marriage, and again, that whole looking good conversation of what did I do? I'm a failure. How did this not work out? We've been through so much together. Why couldn't it work out? And so, realizing that I get to shed those looking good conversations and continue to evolve to be me, and letting go of those whole conversations. And so we divorced, I moved out, I got my own place, and then I just remember I started dating somebody who I thought was wow, this person cherishes me, loves me, treats me amazing, this is great. And so we were dating for several years, and I realized that this was a very stubborn person. And he started, I'm not going to go into too many details, but I'm just going to let you know, he was a really stubborn person. He was very passionate. He had his own airplane. He was a private pilot, and he was so passionate about his flying and his airplane, and that was his life and his obsession. And so he refused to self-care because he started manifesting asthma, signs of asthma, and breathing challenges. And so it was a constant get that checked, get that fixed. And it was a constant, no, I'll lose my license. I'll lose my pilot's license. And so it was a constant to the point where he started like self-medicating because he didn't want to go to the doctor. He didn't want to lose his license. He loved to fly. He loved to be in the sky. That was his whole sense of freedom, you know. And so he would ignore his symptoms. And I just remember seeing him. He came to my house. I hadn't seen him in 2 weeks. And he pulled up to my house. And he was a tall, 6'2", 6'3". I just remember seeing him really skinny. Like he must have lost 40 pounds. I said, oh no. Like you look like he was coming in like he couldn't even breathe. I was like, you're going to the hospital. You're not coming to my house to die. And he's like, no. I said, you go in the hospital. I got him in the car and we took him to the hospital. And the doctor said, you have chronic asthma. Like you need the whole breathing apparatus. Stop being in denial. You get to do this. So he was in the hospital for 4 days, got it all worked out, got his breathing stuff. And at the time he was living in Orlando, I had just relocated to Boca, and he was not taking care of himself, Louis. He was not taking care of himself. And I said, you get to do you first, because I cannot be in a situation. I cannot try to change you. I tried that before, been there, done that with my ex-husband, not gonna work. So I just remember saying, you work on you. You do you. Stop. You know, you're self-medicating with alcohol, trying to fix the problem. That doesn't work for me. Like, not gonna happen. And I just remember 2 weeks after that, his sister called me up. And she was in New Jersey at the time, and she said, and I was dating him, I think it was like 3 or 4 years, I don't remember right now. She called me and she said, you gotta go to Sebastian, he's in the hospital. I'm like, what? She's like, no, he's dying. I'm like, okay, here we go again. She's like, please just get there. There's nobody there. You know, if he dies, I don't want him to die alone. And so I just was like, what is he doing? Like, why would he not take care of himself? Like, the love of flying is literally killing you. Like, really? You know what I'm saying? It just didn't make sense to me. It's just stubbornness. And so I get to the hospital, and I remember seeing him, and he had the oxygen, and he just looked. When I saw him, I said, oh, he won't even make it. He won't even make it 24 hours. I've been there, done that. I've seen this before. This is bad. And so his son came, his ex-wife came, and then his sisters came, and the mom came, and within 2-3 days, we were with him when he transitioned. You know, and I experienced that transition with my mom. I was there with my mom when she died. I was holding her hand, and I was there with my dad, with my child. And so I'm like, okay. It was like a bittersweet moment because it was so sad to us, but part of me saw this peace when he transitioned. And I remember the nurse came in and she said, 6:53. He died at 6:53 p.m. And I remember like a week later, I'm like, oh shit, that's my address, 653 Evening Sky Drive. That's bizarre. I was like, that is really weird. Weird, strange coincidences. But so part of me saw this transition, and I felt this kind of like it was so bittersweet because it was a beautiful transition of finally feeling and seeing and experiencing him in peace. And I just felt this peace for him, and I was like, oh my God, he's finally at peace. And so, you know, I was just talking with his family and with his sisters, and just knowing that. And he was very spiritual. He taught me a lot about, and that's what I was so attracted to him about, was he was so in touch with the universe and God, and really in tune to that. And, you know, he would always talk to me about, you know, the spirit world, and, you know, we're part of something better and greater. And him just reaffirming to me that this is not what we see, this is all temporary. but we are eternal. We're constantly evolving. And that just solidified in my mind. We come from nothing, nothing. We evolve every day. We're not the same. You're not the same. I'm not the same person that I was yesterday. It's a constant evolution, constant evolution. And we don't stop. Just because we die, the evolution doesn't stop. It's that we finally go back home. And that home to me symbolizes peace, symbolizes love, symbolizes eternal beauty, symbolizes something that I couldn't even grasp what it would be like. But I do know that everybody I love, my grandparents, that's even another story. My grandparents, they passed away. I'll never forget. And it was like 1976. I think it was 76. My grandfather passed away, and I was maybe 10 years old or whatever. And I just remember that was my first experience of death. And I'll never forget this experience because I was laying on the couch in my grandparents' house, and in the middle of the night, I woke up and I had this strong scent. You know, everybody has like a scent. And the scent of my grandfather like woke me up. It was so powerful. And that was like an outer body experience. And I wake up and I'm like, Grandpa, you here? And he said, yes, come. I want to show you something. I remember walking down the stairs to the basement. And I was like 9, 10 at the time. And I was like, oh my God. The reality of it was like so scary for me. I'm like, what am I doing? I'm in this basement, you know? And then I kind of like, my senses kicked in, or my fear kicked in, and I ran upstairs and I ran to my mom, and she said, just get in bed, you're having a bad dream. I'm like, no, this was real. This was not a dream. Like, he came to visit me, and he gave me a sense of peace and love that I had never experienced before. And now looking back, I realized I was 10, 9. I was still a child. I still had that childlike innocence. And I still, you know, children are so open and receptive, babies especially, to that spirit world. They're so open and receptive. And so at that age, I was still open and receptive to that peace, to that love, to that spirit of him coming to tell me, I'm okay, you're okay. Like, and so I remember the next day speaking to my brother, speaking to my mom and my sister, and we all woke up, we all had a story. He came to visit each and every one of us, and we had a story. He came to show us love, that he was still, where he was coming from was love. And we all, I mean, my brother, his same thing, he had an intense experience with my grandfather as well. And then looking back, a year later, to the day, a year later, my grandmother she died. A year later, like she literally died on that same anniversary that my grandfather died. Like she knew, I can't do this. Just that hole in her heart was so profound. And so my message would be to let people know that yes, it's painful. And yes, it's a journey. But that love, reach up. Because it's wanting you. It's like pulling us. But be open, be receptive, know that it's there. And through each experience that I've had, looking back, I can tell you that there is a magnetic pull of love, of peace, of us, you know, of God wanting us to evolve and to get to that place. You have to be open to receive it. And you have to know that sometimes these things happen in our lives to wake us up, to give us a wake-up call. And so what are we going to do with that wake-up call? Are we going to continue to be in our pity party like I was? Been there, done that. Felt sorry for myself. Been there, done that. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to know that, because life will keep lifing and life will keep happening. And I want to know that when the storm comes, I now have an anchor of love that I know something greater is developing and happening. This is happening for a reason. Something even more profound is gonna manifest. It's gonna be cultivated. And so, what is it? Maybe ask yourself that question. What is it in your life that's gonna call your attention to bring you to that place of remembering who we are?
Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Queens, New York. I grew up in a beautiful neighborhood, very residential. It's called Whitestone, right next to the Whitestone Bridge. And I grew up in a very beautiful home, very big home. My parents did provide a beautiful place for us to live. And it was a very nice neighborhood. I sometimes didn't even want to tell people, oh, I'm from Malba, because then it was like, oh, like that. And I didn't want that. I was like, oh, I'm from Whitestone. Just keep it, I didn't want to be looked at any differently. But so, I wasn't spoiled. They provided a beautiful home for us. I still got my sister's hand-me-downs, I still got used things. But they did provide a beautiful home for us. And, I grew up, as I said, it was ups and it was downs and it was extremes. It was extremes, good and bad.
Yeah. So now, can you describe the games you played as a child?
Oh, yeah. Wow. Okay. All right. So I'm 52. So, we didn't obviously have cell phones. We had fun games. Mm-hmm. We had games of real interaction, like tag or frisbee or roller skates. I just remember being and feeling so alive, in New York, it's wintertime, you're hibernating, and as soon as spring came, I told you, I'm a spring baby, out the door, I was out running, and I felt alive. I was like, this whole new life was just, the flowers were blooming. New York, believe it or not, in the springtime, especially in those residential neighborhoods, really beautiful and flourishing and blooming. And I just remember out with the friends, riding bikes for hours on end in the summer, and then roller skating, and this sense of freedom and being in the flow and just loving, everything that it gave me. Yeah, so it was great. It was a time of interaction. And then my best friend across the street, she had 5 siblings. Mm-hmm. So she had, brothers and sisters, and it was like constantly at her house and constantly, playing and doing, and then just fun. Good old-fashioned, real good fun. And it was great. I have great memories of that. I really do.
Now, if you had to describe your childhood in one word, what word would it be and why?
Looking at it from where I am today, my vantage point, describing it in one word, I guess that would be it's just constantly changing. It was just I don't know what the word would be. It was just like a constant evolution. It was never, everything was always different. Every day was a different, and maybe I needed that sameness, but it was like just evolving, an evolution of change.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. What sort of things did your family celebrate?
We celebrated, we celebrated, it was interesting because we did celebrate Christmas. We did obviously celebrate birthdays. We did celebrate graduations. Everything was a celebration. But it was more, Christmas, for example, was more of that, get the Christmas tree and that whole, beautiful experience that we had. And my mom made all of our clothes. So my sister, my mother, myself, we all had our same outfits for Easter and for the holidays. And I just remember, even though we celebrated Easter, even though we celebrated Christmas, my parents, when they came from Spain, in the 40s, there was a dictator, Francisco Franco, and the whole corruption of the Catholic Church and the government was really bad. So when my grandparents came here, they were against the Catholic Church. So I grew up not in a dogmatic type of religious type of go to church and this and no. We grew up. And at the time it bothered me because I'm like, oh my God, all my friends are Catholic and who am I? I don't even know. But my parents said, no. God is where you are. And I didn't like that answer. And I was not satisfied because I told you, same, like I kind of felt like I'm the odd one out. Why is everybody going to church and this and that? And my parents would say, no, you don't need church. Come here, you talk to God in your room. What? What are you talking about? What do you mean? Now I'm grateful to God that I was raised that way because it planted the seed of me knowing that God was accessible to wherever I was. And so they were doing it because of Franco and the church and the corruption. And my grandfather was very educated. He had his doctorate. My grandmother was one of the first Spaniards to get her doctorate in Spain. And so they had a radio show. And they were not very happy with the government. And they were censored. And they were threatened. And they were off the radio. And so my grandfather like I said, they were very educated and they were against. They saw the corruption of the Catholic Church back then. And back then in Spain, you didn't talk against the church or the state or Franco. And they did. And he ended up managing to come to this country and wanting us to know, no, God is not just in a church. There's more to God than just the Vatican and just the church. And so like I said, I just didn't get that. And now I'm like, my God, they were so wise to allow me to realize that. And so for me, with my kids, I educate them and I do the same thing and let them know your relationship is with God. That's your relationship. You don't need the church. My belief, everybody's different. I felt we didn't need the church and that whole dogmatic principle of the church to have a relationship with God. We are part of God. And so I grew up, at the time when I was young, a little resentful because I didn't know where I fit in. But now I'm like, wow, I'm so thankful, So yeah, it was a unique childhood in that sense.
Now, what were your family's attitude towards alcohol and smoking?
Good question. My parents, they didn't really drink as far as excessively. I know, like if it was a holiday, or we would go to the Spanish club where all the Spaniards would get together from the old country, and on Sundays they would get together and make these huge meals and all this great food, and of course there was wine and alcohol, and the kids were running around. But it was never in excess, and it was never abused. And my mom had a little glass of wine every night with dinner, and it was just part of the culture. Red wine is good for you. In Spain, they give you a little drop and you're a baby. So I never looked at it like problematic or excessive or abusive. So it was never like, no, you can't. It was more like, if you're going to try it, just try it here. And it was very social. So it was never a problem, thank God. And smoking, interestingly enough, yeah, my parents smoked. They went through phases. I remember my dad used to smoke Kent cigarettes when I was like 12. He'd say, go to the store, buy me a pack of Kent. I think they were 50 cents. I would buy him a pack of Kent cigarettes. But I remember one day he came home and he said, that's it, I'm done. I was like 13. I said, what do you mean you're done? I'm not smoking. Something must have triggered, maybe, he didn't tell us, but he stopped smoking. And that was it. It was just like, done. And then my mom was very casual. If friends came over and they had a glass of wine, she would have a cigarette. Yeah. So it was never excessive or abusive, no.
What was discipline like at home?
For me, it was actually probably very lenient because I was the youngest. So I probably got away with a lot. And I don't think they had to worry too much about me because I was always like, I'm with my sister, Isabel. I'm with Isabel. I'm with Juanito, my brother, John. I was with them. So they felt like, okay, she's with them. She's safe or whatever. It was never very super strict. It was like they whistled. My dad came out, opened the door, whistled. You came home. You didn't want to be yelled at because he was loud and he would yell and you didn't want that. So it was like, okay, So it was back in the 70s. It was just a different way of living. It was good and it was safer outside and it was more of a community of people we lived in. So maybe they didn't have that, fear. Yeah. So they weren't super, super strict, but we knew when we had to be home and we adhered to it. That was okay.
So what were they strict about? And repeat the question.
What were they strict about? They were probably strict about, I wouldn't even say strict. I would say that they had these expectations of us and we felt that we had to live by these expectations. Yeah. And I know for example, my brother was like the golden child, very smart. He went to Harvard, graduated from Harvard in the 80s. And so they had these high levels of expectations. Like my grandmother, I told you, was like one of the first to get her doctorate in Spain. So it was like, we have these expectations we get to live by is what I felt. Maybe they didn't say it, but I felt that underlying of, expectations. We get to do this. We get to live by this. So there was just like expectations that we knew. And it was not like they forcefully imposed them, but it was just like an expectancy. Like, no, this is what it is.
Yeah. Right. Now, where did you go to school? All the way from elementary through the highest level.
Okay, so good question. I went to school, I went to public school, great school, right down the block from my house, PS 193, I'll never forget. And it was a great school, public school up until 6th grade. And then I went to middle school, public school, and then I went to public high school. And then I remember graduating and feeling like, oh my God, I'm going to college, but my brother went to Harvard and it's like, I'm only going to like a community college. Like I felt like in my eyes, I felt like it wasn't good enough. So I kind of had that feeling of, maybe disappointing myself. My parents weren't necessarily disappointed. I always felt supported in whatever I did and I always felt loved, and my dad was like cheerleader for me and always believed in me and knew like whatever you set your mind to, you're gonna do it. And I always had that feeling and knowingness. So I went to school and then I remember saying, no, I wanna travel. So like my second semester or third semester in college, I said, I'm going to Spain. Really? Yeah, I'm gonna go to college in Spain. Okay. So I remember La Universidad de Sevilla, in Spain, in Sevilla, in Andalusia. I was like, oh, this is great. This is good. I'm enjoying this. So I remember back in the 80s going to college there, taking classes, and it was just a different mentality. And I was like freedom and joy and experiencing my culture, and experiencing where I came from and seeing where my mom was from and going to visit where my dad was from and traveling. And appreciating another country and, of course, getting a boyfriend and, Mom, not coming home. I thought you were coming home. No, I'm not. I ended up living there for like 2.5 years and studying. And then I remember like getting a job. I was like, oh, this is good. You speak English. You can get a job anywhere teaching English, right? Back in those days, if you speak English, that's your ticket in the door. I was teaching English to like executives. Here I am like 19 years old. And at the time in the 80s, getting paid like $12, $13 an hour in Spain, that was like I was like, this is good. I can do this. Okay, that's all. That was good with the exchange rate and everything. Yeah. So I had my apartment. I got a roommate. I was working, having the time of my life, and teaching English to these executive men who were like 50. At the time, I'm like, oh my God, they're so old. They were probably like 50, my age, like 50, 60 years old. And I just remember that was what gave me this confidence to be able to say, wow, I know something they don't. I get to teach them, So it was like a confidence booster. Yeah. And it was an amazing experience to be able to teach and to be able to go through that whole journey of total freedom and total independence. Yeah. And everything. And then at the time, I remember my boyfriend at the time was studying to be a doctor. And he said, well, I'm going to Mexico. I have my residency to do in Mexico. And I have to be there in, let's say, September. But we have 2 months. Do you want to travel? I said, yeah, let's go. What the hell? So I remember we traveled. Here I am, 20 years old. And we took 3 months. And we traveled from Mexico all the way, hitchhiked. From Mexico all the way. We had the time of our lives. We traveled. I was with him and his brother. And we traveled all through Mexico and just had amazing experiences of learning a new, seeing this whole new culture. I'd never been to Mexico, and going to the sacred, pyramids and all these ruins. And then we went through Guatemala, Honduras, went all through Mexico, all the way to Panama, and just had an experience of, wow, this is life. Like, you just, I felt secure. I was with 2 guys. I didn't feel like, people were like, were you afraid to hitchhike? No, I was with 2 guys. Whatever. I remember an experience, though. We were hitchhiking, and of course, I always had to speak Spanish. They were like, don't speak English, even though I look like a gringa. I'm like, okay, bueno, I'll speak Spanish, fine. So we were obviously all the time speaking Spanish. And then I'll never forget, we're in this car. We got a ride from these 2 guys. We were, hey, we're going to the next town and whatever. And so we get this ride for like 2 hours. We're in the car. And he opens the glove box slowly. And I see this big freaking gun. I'm like poking my boyfriend at the time. I'm like sweating, and I'm seeing my whole life pass before my eyes, and I'm making up all these stories. I'm like, that's it. I'm dead. Like, they could just like threaten these guys, and I'm like, they could just kidnap me and I'm gone, And I just had this whole experience of literally my life flashing before my eyes. And it was a very sobering experience, because I realized you can't always be that. You gotta be a little more cautious. But I always felt protected. I always felt protection. And I always went with my gut intuition also, which has served me. So they say your gut, your stomach is like your other brain, because you feel it in your gut, your intuition. So I've guided myself through that. And I remember going back in life and remembering my gut intuition with certain things. And now when I give advice to my kids, my first advice, like when they go off to college or when they go off anywhere, even in elementary school, I would tell them, you always know your answers. Your intuition knows. You may feel confused and I don't know, but when you are quiet in your own mind, you know all the answers. It's all within you. Your intuition knows. You get to cultivate that, and you get to tap into that. And so these experiences that I've had throughout my life they've always been about remembering when I didn't listen to my intuition and what were my consequences of not listening to my intuition. And as I get older, I realize that intuition gets really loud. And then one day it screams at you. And it tells you, like, wake up, you're in the wrong marriage, or wake up, how long are you going to keep doing this? So that's that inner knowing, and that voice of wisdom that we all have, that inner voice of wisdom. And some people have it easier than others, and some people listen to it easier. And I feel like in life, those lessons will keep coming back and get louder and stronger unless we listen to that inner voice of wisdom and intuition. And I mean, that's what has happened to me in my life, right? Not listening to my voice and to my inner voice of wisdom and that intuition. I had to repeat many lessons in my life over and over, and each lesson got much louder and much stronger, so that was my experience. Yeah, I mean, that's my experience with not listening to my intuition,
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next one.
Okay.
All right. And you kind of alluded to the answer already.
Go ahead.
Which was, what was your first paying job?
Yeah, well, okay. So that job was amazing when I was like 19, 20. But my first paying job, I've always been very entrepreneurial. I've always been like, what can I do? Like, I want to make money. I want to be my own boss. I want to do something. So I just remember as a 14-year-old, because my parents provided the basics in the home and the food and this, but if you want those 3 pairs of Jordache jeans, you're gonna have to buy them on your own, you know what I mean? Like, we're gonna provide this, but I always wanted more, right? Yeah. Okay, I'll find my way. So I remember I was 14, and there was a neighbor like 3 houses down. She was a single woman. And I just remember befriending her and just, hey, you have cats, can I help you? Or it's snowing, can I shovel your snow? Or the leaves. So we became really friendly. I had an admiration and love for her, and we became really friendly. And so I was helping her, and she would pay me, and she would pay me good. And I started to clean her home, and I was 14, cleaning homes, and loving that feeling of earning money and independence and that sense of pride. And I think it's such an amazing feeling because, you get to earn, and you get to learn the value of money. And so I was earning money just on Saturdays. I was cleaning, raking leaves, sweeping, cleaning up the cat litter, or whatever I can do to help out. And so, or cleaning her car. Oh my God, her son had a 280Z in 1982, I want to say. It was this beautiful 280Z. I said, oh my God, can I clean your car? And they allowed me to clean this car, and I didn't know how to drive a stick, but they taught me. Yeah. So I'm like driving this stick at 14, and I'm like, I'll be back. I'm just gonna drive the car and bring it back. And so I just remember having that sense of pride, and knowing that is such a good feeling to be able to do something and earn money. And I always instill that in my kids. Thankfully, again, I give my kids the basics. They want this, they want that. Okay, great. How can you create that? And so because of that, they've had jobs, and they've worked, and they've also learned that that's an important part of being able to appreciate your own money, And I saved up for my first car, a 1977 Ford Thunderbird.
Yeah.
Huge boat. It was huge. But that sense of pride was like, wow, I did this, It was good. It was good.
All right, that brings us to, what's your favorite job up until today?
So my favorite job, I've had several jobs in my life, but what I've noticed is all of my favorite jobs have a thread of consistency of what happens in those jobs. And that type of job for me, my personality, knowing myself now, on my personality matrix, I'm a supporter, I'm a giver, I like to uplift people. So my favorite jobs have always been to be able to help and assist people and allow them to feel better. Once I've left, to feel better that I was actually there in their lives. And I just remember having jobs. One of my favorite jobs, I remember I worked for a company, and I was selling education and continuing education and education to teachers and school systems. And I just remember going in, and I think my best quality was me. Let's forget about what I have here. Let's talk about you and how can I support you. And I ended up having this rapport with people very quickly, and I ended up selling a lot in my was getting a lot of bonuses, and they were always like, well, what do you do? And what is, all this technicality stuff. And I was just like, no, I actually end up like, I would have people crying at the end of these conversations, like, oh my God, I'm going through a divorce and this. And I had this ability for people just to open up in a way. And maybe because I exerted and I exposed myself and I was vulnerable and I opened that door first, and that made them feel safe to do that as well. So in all these different sales jobs that I've had, I had the ability to do that. So my favorite job has always been one where I can uplift somebody and just allow them to not feel judged and just to talk to them. And then I end up selling and doing really well. Yeah. What is the lesson here that I'm supposed to learn? And in perfect example, like I never knew what a panic attack was, okay? And I just remember laying in bed and I woke up and my body just began to be in panic mode, which was, I'd never experienced this. I didn't know what it was. It was literally like my heart beating so fast. Literally, like, I can't explain it, but it was like I needed to jump out of my skin. It was just like I needed to run through a wall. It was just this, I needed to escape my body, and I didn't know how. And back then, in the moment, it's just like, oh my God, how am I going to feel better? What am I going to do? And it was just a way of trying to soothe myself and work myself out of it. Take a shower, do this. What am I going to do? But the lesson, if we can take away, if I can go back to what is my lesson from that, my lesson was I was ignoring myself. I was ignoring my wishes. I was ignoring and shutting that inner voice of wisdom. So finally, my body just was like, she needed to get my attention and needed to say, hey, what's going on with you? And put me in a place where I could just be with myself and get to my attention of where I needed to be. So for me, the few times I had panic attacks, and thankfully now I know how to talk myself out of it, it was because it was trying to allow me to recognize that I was not on the right path. I was not I was not listening to myself. I was not listening to my inner voice of wisdom. So it was like a shock to my system, but it got my attention. It got my attention real quick. Yeah.
So we're back.
Yeah.
I recorded some of what you were saying.
Okay.
We'll see. It's probably going to make it in there.
Okay.
It's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
You're probably going to have to do a lot of editing because I think I'm going back and forth.
No, it's going on the same way that we talk. That's the way it's going to go.
Okay, because Rico can do the editing for this if you want him to. Yeah. He's good.
Awesome. Now,
yeah,
we talked about the favorite job.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we want to ask, which one was your least favorite job you've had?
Oh, God. I could tell you what. My least favorite job. I learned so much from this job. I worked, I don't want to say the name of the company, but I was selling fellowship education to doctors for metabolic and nutritional medicine. And I absolutely love everything I learned, because if I'm selling a $40,000 fellowship to a doctor, I better know what I'm talking about, right? Mm-hmm. So I had a lot of training and I learned a lot. I'm into health and wellness and I loved everything I learned. It was more of an integrative, natural way to look in the body as to what is, let's heal the root cause, not just treat the symptom, which is more of the allopathic medicine, Western medicine. So I love that job, but what I did not like was the box that I was put in. I couldn't be creative. It was like, these are the rules, this is what you do. And I didn't have that expression of being free. I didn't have that. It was just too rigid, and I needed more of the freedom and the independence. And it was corporate, and it was in an office. And I don't necessarily do well in an office setting. As far as, I like to be free, I like to be out. I mean, when I go out, the smell of grass is freedom for me. And I'm like, oh, I need that in my life, you know? So that disconnection with being in an office all day, I just couldn't do it. And it wasn't because I loved what I was selling. I just can't do a corporate type of sit in an office type of job. Okay. So those are the jobs that
Yeah.
Not for me. Not for me.
Awesome. All right. So, are you married?
So no, I am not married. I am, for the first time in a long time, I am alone, and I don't feel lonely. I feel like I'm in a place where I get to nurture and love and self-care myself, you know? And so I'm having an amazing experience of learning and growing, you know, myself, in myself.
What do you do in your spare time?
So interestingly enough, what I love to do in my spare time, besides being in nature and being outdoors, I love to be on the journey of growth. So whether it's a leadership training, I mean, I did a leadership training back 2 years ago, you know, and it was transformational leadership training, and that led me to this path of self-discovery of learning to shed the layers of who I thought, because I'm not who I think I am, and I'm not who you think I am. I am who I think that I am, right? If that makes sense. Okay. So I learned to shed those layers of the ego through all these different types of transformational courses, and I'm always looking to do different transformational courses. So whether it's a Course in Miracles on Tuesdays, or whether it's I am with a good friend, Lynn Everett. We do an intention class on Thursdays. So it seems to me that I'm always looking to not only to grow myself as a person, as a human, and evolve, but I'm really looking to be the soil so that I can assist others, so that they can learn, they can grow, they can manifest into becoming their best version of themselves. So for me, my vision is, my vision for myself, my vision for the world is to allow people to know that they have the seeds of greatness to become the best version of themselves. And so for me, whether it's, you know, whatever I'm doing, it's going to be able to live that vision out. So I always love to commune with like-minded people who are wanting to evolve, to change, to grow, to shed the layers of the ego, of which, you know, our higher self is what I'm looking to cultivate. And then there's the ego, right? There's that ego that comes in, and then it says, you know, who I am or who I think I am, and these stories that we hear in our minds. And so my job, I feel, on my spare time is to shed the layers of that ego and to evolve more towards love. And so that's the journey I'm on, as far as wanting to grow and cultivate that in myself, and intuitively meeting like-minded people. Because look, I didn't know you were doing this project, and here I had this idea of how, you know, I would love to be able to share my story with people and let them know, shit, if I've been through this pain, if I've been through this suffering, if I've been through all these deaths, you know, a parents, a child, a significant other, the death of a marriage, if I can overcome that, you can do it too. And we can learn from it, and we can actually transmute it to be something beautiful. We can actually have that be, you know, instead of looking at it like, oh, woe is me, look at what happened to me. How about we look at that and say, okay, great, that's what happened. What lesson can you learn from it? How has that made you better as a person? Maybe you wouldn't have even realized that could make you a better person. How can we allow you to be aware that you can extract goodness from that? How can we allow you to use that to cultivate something so beautiful that you can share in the world and that you can grow? I feel like we're all here as in this civilization to be civil, to have relationship with others so that we can share our stories, share love, right? You know, Course in Miracles, it's like philosophy is it's either you're coming from love or coming from fear, one or the other. So how can we come from love and learn from our journey? Or how can I show you that the journey you've been on is really evolving you to find love, source, God, whatever you want to call it. And how can you maybe now be aware of that? Maybe you weren't even aware of that. Or maybe you are doing the work and you are aware of that and you want to share that with others. And so it's all about being your own alchemist and transmuting those stories into something beautiful. And so, that's what I'm doing. That's
awesome.
what I believe in,
Awesome.
Yeah.
Now, have you ever told yourself there is something wrong here?
Oh.
And when was the first time?
Oh,
that
yeah.
you recall?
Oh, yeah.
And what happened?
So, in the society we live in, as it's just constant comparing, as a female, maybe I'll give my point of view as a female, it's like you question, I would question myself, like, oh, it's a constant comparison. Is something wrong with me? Like, oh, shit, she got her period, I didn't. You're 13, you're 12. It's like a constant, or she's this and I didn't. And for me, it was a constant comparing. And so it would feel like, oh, is this wrong? Am I not right? And so as a young female, I feel that the culture and it gives that type of, it teaches us to be that way. It influences us to be that way. So yes, I've looked at myself and said, what's wrong here and what's wrong with me? Or maybe, I don't have this and she has that. And so the beauty of aging, I'm 52, so the beauty of it what has transpired for me is to let go of those stories and realize God has given me a beautiful, healthy body, mind, and spirit. I get to acknowledge that and appreciate that instead of constantly judge it. So I came from a place of constant judgment to, I finally can say I came to a place of acknowledging that I'm judging and saying, where is that fear coming from? Why am I judging? We are perfect, whole, complete, and unique. Why do I need to be, I have gray hair, I have this, I have that. Why do I need to be a certain specific way? I get to love myself and accept myself. And as I age, I've realized that love and appreciation that I now have for myself is that inner beauty. And for me, what I've realized is you can do a facelift, or people can do a boob job, or people can do whatever they want. And I'm not judging them. That makes them feel good. That's great. But I realized that's just the exterior. I get to love myself from within because the inner beauty is what's going to radiate, So I've seen people with Botox and this and that, and I'm like, and they're still not happy? That doesn't define happiness. What defines happiness for me is loving and accepting and appreciating what God has given me and saying, wow, this is the body I've been given in this world, and I get to embrace that. And by falling in love and embracing that, it's interesting because, there's a saying, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Yeah. And so what I've come to acknowledge is that I've changed the way I've looked at myself for years. You're a teenager, it's this, cellulite, whatever. And it's like, no. I'm looking at myself with a love of like, this body has been through I've given birth. This body has transformed in so many ways, and I get to honor that and appreciate that. I've nourished my kids. I breastfed my kids for 9 months. My body was able to do that. I was able to do so many things with this body, and it has taken me, these feet have taken me on journeys. And so, I really honor and I really get to appreciate that. And for me, that's embracing the inner sacred feminine within. Yeah. And so that's been my experience.
All right.
That has been my experience, yeah.
All right, so we're down to the last 2 questions.
Okay.
Who are you becoming?
Wow. That's an amazing question because, as I told you, my vision for the world is, and my vision for myself is for me to become the best possible version of myself. So when I realize who I'm becoming, I am becoming closer to God. I am becoming that God-like. God is love. God is peace, right? I'm becoming love. I'm becoming peace. I'm becoming the best version of myself. And in order to attract that, you get to be that. And so through these trials and tribulations of life, I feel that I'm becoming closer and more one with my higher self, with God. So it's a beautiful journey. It really is.
All right, so here's the last question.
Yes.
So, fast forward,
Okay.
I don't know, 100 years from now.
Wow.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't happen anytime soon.
Okay.
But it's going to happen. That means
Yes.
that we're going to pass.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Think about that a lot.
So, what's being said in your eulogy?
Wow. Well, for me, what I learned is that the Mexicans believe there are 3 deaths. The first death is when you're cognizant of your immortality and you realize, oh, I'm going to die one day. And the second death is when you take your last breath. And then the third death is the last time someone says your name. So in my eulogy, and what I want is for my name to be able to live on in a way where people can remember and say my name and say, that person, Louise Gomes, has been the epitome of self-evolution, of love, of being able to access her God within, her goddess within, to commune with God. And that I shared that with others so that they can cultivate their best selves and that they can become one with their relationship with God. And so I just wanted to be said that I was the space for them to be able to realize and to acknowledge their self-evolution, to become the best version of themselves. And with that, I would be very happy. Yeah. Very, very happy.
All right, so
thank you.
That's part of the interview.
Okay.
Now you have however long to share a message.
Wow.
Last word.
So my last words would be, first and foremost, I want to thank you, Louise, for allowing me to share my story, my information. And I really just want to let people know that if I can overcome all these obstacles and pain and repeated situations of death that were presented in my life, and if I can push through that and find beauty actually on the other side, I know that you can do it too. And my goal and my journey is to allow people to know that they can do that too. And we all have that power and access to God to be able to pull through that. And I just want to thank you for allowing me to be able to share that information with everybody. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.